Well, the big stories we're watching this morning, along with that one, is anxiously awaiting the Mueller report. If it will be delivered today or not is the big question. And also questions surrounding Jared Kushner's communications with foreign leaders through WhatsApp and also using a personal email account.
And what is the FBI doing about WhatsApp?
Well, let's ask. MSNBC chief legal correspondent and host of The Beat on MSNBC, Ari Melber, former U.S. attorney and former aide to Robert Mueller, now an NBC News law enforcement analyst. Chuck Rosenberg is with us, and former United States attorney for the Southern District of New York, Preet Bharara. He's out with a new book entitled Doing Justice, a prosecutor's thoughts on crime, punishment, and the rule of law.
So, Preet, let's begin with you. We've heard once again that the Mueller report is going to be released. This reminds me like every Friday when we heard in maybe it was 2005, 2006, this is a Friday that Karl Rove is going to be indicted. Joe, we need you in front of a camera. And I think I heard that for every Friday one summer. We have been hearing about the release or the ending of the Mueller the Mueller investigation and the coming out of the report now for a year or so. What should do we expect the report to be out today at noon, or is this just more bad reporting?
It's funny you mentioned Karl Rove back in 2005, 2006. I was working in the Senate at the time, and I remember multiple people calling me up saying there was a hot rumor that Patrick Fitzgerald was about to indict 22 people in the Bush administration. And what I know about it, because once upon a time, Pat Fitzgerald and I worked in the same office, so there is a bit of deja vu. But there's even more recent deja vu. 3 weeks ago, we went through the same drill where we were hearing hour by hour the Mueller report is going to be handed over to the AG. I've heard all the same rumors you have. I've been a little bit more skeptical than other people because there are some signs that the Mueller report is not going to come anytime soon, because the work doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon, because there's still Rick Gates, who has continuing to cooperate with respect to several investigations. Rod Rosenstein has said he's going to stay on. So I am cautiously skeptical of the fact that the Mueller report will come out by noon, but I could be completely wrong because nobody knows.
And Chuck, these rumors, where do they come from? Why do they continue? And again, why would it make sense that he would wrap things up if he just asked the judge for an additional 6 weeks to figure out exactly what recommendations to make for Rick Gates, and also because you have a certain individual from Fort Lauderdale that they still have business to do with?
Yeah, you're referring to Mr. Stone, who's now under indictment. And sure, it's the Mueller team that indicted him and will prosecute him in federal court. To Preet's point, there is still ongoing sentencing for Rick Gates, for Michael Flynn. And don't forget, months ago we learned that Jerome Corsi was handed a plea agreement. It would be highly unusual for federal prosecutors to give someone a plea agreement, to ask them to plead guilty, and then just to simply walk away from the case. So there seems to be some threads left to pull. I don't know where the rumors come from. I hear them all the time. Like Preet, I am somewhat skeptical for the same reasons he articulated. Let me just add, by the way, since you mentioned his book, I read his book, Doing Justice. It is terrific. I wrote a review of it for Lawfare. Read his book, not my review. He did a wonderful job talking about the really difficult decisions that prosecutors and agents are faced with, including, by the way, in cases like the one before us. So highly recommended.
All right, book recommendation. Very nice, Chuck.
Interesting.
Ari, let me ask you, we
lovely.
won't ask you to play the parlor game of when the report's going to come out, because, as Preet said, nobody knows at this point. But I will ask you about what's left for Bob Mueller based on what we know publicly. Yeah. What else is out there that he still needs to resolve?
Well, 2 points. I don't want to steal Chuck Rosenberg's thunder, but Chuck, I know you love the rapper A$AP Ferg.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more, and I'll tell you how much I love him or her.
He has a dollar sign in his name, Chuck.
None of that, Ari. Let's just talk about the law. Go, Ari.
He famously said, I'm going to work for months. I don't take vacations. I'm like a bad doctor. I don't got no patience. And I think that's Washington right now. No patience for any of this. I'm sorry, Joe. no patience, and everyone wants it to go a certain way because of what they want. And, and I would just echo what Preet and Chuck said. There are clues, we don't know, and we'll see what the federal process is. To the legal question you posed, look, a lot of this can be handed off if Bob Mueller has reached his findings, doesn't want an in-person interview with the president, and wants to take the Roger Stone case and hand it completely to D.C., or wants to take other cases and farm them out, or the fact that the grand jury has not, according to public clues, been meeting recently doesn't mean it hasn't already done other things. It is possible that there are other sealed indictments and they could be revealed at a later date or in conjunction with him finishing or turning in findings. It's also possible there are no more indictments, referring to the Fitzgerald precedent. And Pat Fitzgerald, of course, was operating under these same rules, was appointed by a recused person acting as Attorney General, at the time Deputy Attorney General James Comey. So there are precedents that give us a snapshot, and there are certain things that could be farmed out, or it could take longer. That's why ultimately we're all looking at very limited clues.
You know, John Meacham, if you could just send Ari Melber the memo.
Yeah.
We only quote Manilow on this show.
Yeah, Barry.
Last night, I said goodbye.
Oh, my God.
Now it's been years. I'm back in the city where nothing is clear, and certainly nothing's clear on Mueller. See, I just did it too.
Amen.
There it is.
Well done. Well done.
Well, thank you very much. But John Meacham is with us.
I don't understand anything that's been said in the last 30 seconds.
He has a Hamlet quote, a reference to the French Indian War, and a question for Preet. Go ahead.
Preet, did you ever actually prosecute anything involving the Shays Rebellion? Because it was a critical case.
Oh my God.
Early on.
There was a statute of limitations problem.
If that were true, I'd be out of business. Going forward, we've talked about how, Ari's pointed out, there may be ongoing investigations. What's the historical precedent for that? I don't remember. I don't think there were too many Watergate investigations that continued past Jaworski. But Iran-Contra, I mean, are we going to be looking at possibly a series of open matters even after the report?
Yeah, I don't know what the historical precedent is. I'm not aware of any, but I'm not a certified historian like yourself. And it may be a function of the current climate. You know, lots of times when special prosecutors or independent counsels historically have had cases handed to them, they like to keep them. And that's true in the Southern District as well. When you find things that you think you can prosecute, you assume that you're going to be allowed to continue until you're done with all of it. And it may be that Bob Mueller in this case, because he saw the tea leaves, he kept hearing about the threats to his viability of continuing as special counsel, that Donald Trump what might terminate him at any moment, that he actually moved more quickly, referred some cases to SDNY, to the National Security Division at Main Justice, and to D.C. And so it could be that this would be the first time that you have, as you say, a proliferation of cases continuing beyond his own lifespan as special counsel because of the threat that keeps coming from Donald Trump. And also you have lots of folks being emboldened by the fact that Donald Trump has said, you know, he might exercise his pardon power. It's ironic to me in some ways. You have Cy Vance, the district attorney in Manhattan, bringing a case against Paul Manafort on the very day he gets sentenced. And my sense is that he did that in part, obviously, because he wanted to have a pardon-proof charge against Paul Manafort, which is probably the result of a lot of, exercising of the pardon muscle and power that Donald Trump has shown. If Donald Trump had kept his mouth shut and not sort of casually and cavalierly talked about pardoning people, I'm not sure that Paul Manafort would be under indictment by Cy Vance.
Chuck, you worked for Bob Mueller previously in a previous life. A two-parter for you. What kind of report do you expect him to present to the Attorney General? Will it be a voluminous report, or will it just be a list of indictments, many of which we've already seen? And the second part of my question is, what do you believe the obligation to be of the Attorney General in terms of how much to present to the American public? The full report with redactions, a summary of the report, or not at all, as some have suspected he may do?
Yeah, let me take the second part first. I think this is a tricky question for Bill Barr, because I can think of at least 4 categories of stuff that could be in a report that he either can't fully share or doesn't want to share. You could have classified information, which could be shared if declassified or redacted, but otherwise has to remain private. You can have grand jury information, which could only be shared with a judge's order. You could have information that exonerates other people. Now, Preet knows that occasionally the Justice Department makes that type of information public, but typically we do not. And this may be the most important part, there is information undoubtedly about ongoing investigations. As Preet noted, some of that has been handed off to other districts, including the Southern District of New York. One of the reasons that has been handed off, as Preet said, is to insulate some of these cases, I have no doubt. But another reason is because Mueller's remit is actually quite narrow. His remit really is just Russian interference in the 2016 election and any association or links to those on the Trump campaign. And so it would make sense to me that you would have other stuff in this report that would have to go elsewhere to be prosecuted. Having worked for Mueller, I can tell you that my guess when this thing comes is that it's going to be pretty darn thorough, because I think he gets criticized for leaving stuff out of it. Now, the harder decision, of course, as we've been discussing, is what Barr does with it, not what Mueller does with it.
So, Ari, you made the point earlier, something we've been saying, which is that whenever this report comes out, people are going to project their preconceived conclusions onto it. A lot of people in this country have made up their mind that the president colluded or that he didn't collude with Russians during the campaign. Does that make it more of an obligation for Attorney General Barr to present the full report so that people can't sort of guess and speculate about the missing parts?
That's a good question. I mean, under the rules, it is the Attorney General's call with a very broad standard about what you release. And I think Chuck obviously just walked through a lot of the federal statutory restrictions on that. Big picture, I think when people look at this, it would be important to understand that the Mueller findings about what's happened begin at the beginning and they end at the end. And so if the last thing he does, for example, is have findings that do not have chargeable conspiracy on the election, that would be good news for Donald Trump, who has said in his shorthand no collusion, and that would be Bob Mueller determining that there at least was not chargeable collusion. Does that alone mean that this was all a great celebration for the Trump administration? Well, we have a historian here and we have some law enforcement experts. I think they would all note the precedent that this is a faster indictment rate of presidential advisors than any president in American history. The Watergate stuff coming in the second term, Bill Clinton having basically a few people in the second term, Barack Obama going 8 years, no one was ever indicted. Just over 2 years in, Donald Trump has had 6 advisors indicted, some convicted. That's not something most normal presidents spike the football over, even if Bob Mueller doesn't ultimately charge on election conspiracy. And if he doesn't, we all in the factual community will note that that part would be good news for the president.
A lot of witches. All right, Preet Bharara, thank you very much. The new book is Doing Justice, a prosecutor's thoughts on crime, punishment, and the rule of law. Chuck Rosenberg, Ari Melber, thank you both as well. Ari will be watching The Beat at 6 p.m. Eastern right here on MSNBC. And Willie, before we get to our last break of the morning, what do you have this Sunday on Sunday Today?
Thank you for asking, Mika. My guest is Academy Award winner Lupita Nyong'o. She and I got together to talk about the new Jordan Peele movie, Us. Remember, he put out a couple of years ago, Get Out. It was a phenomenon. This film, I think, is scarier than Get Out, and she plays 2 characters. It's a story about a family and their doppelgangers who have come to do them great harm without giving up too much.
Wow.
Incredible movie, and she's just wonderful to talk to. Smart and graceful and everything you'd expect from her.
By the way, Willie, a lot of bro love yesterday on Twitter between you and Ryan Reynolds.
That's nice.
Get a room.
You know,
I'm like starting to weep.
He said something nice about me in an article, and I thanked him for saying that. And he said, before you thank me, they took out the second part, and he showed me the quote that he sent, which was a horrible, profane insult.
Horrible.
It really went after my character. So that's
I
right.
like to stay busy following Christina Geist.
That's the move.
On Twitter, she's
Christina
amazing.
Geist. She's a good one.
Yes,
better than
up
me
next,
by a lot.
I agree. 2 big health stories we're following this morning. The FDA approves the first drug specifically for severe postpartum depression. This could have massive impact.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and the retail cost, $34,000.
Not so fantastic.
Plus, the governor of Kentucky says that he exposed his 9 young children to chickenpox rather than having them vaccinated. We will talk about that. Keep it right here on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.